I think it's extremely important that we recognise and remember the contribution that black people have made in history, full stop. There is something for me about the contribution in nursing and the NHS, because my mum was one of the people that came over from Jamaica to do her nurse training. And when I look at her contributions to the NHS, it's something we shouldn't forget. When I went to college, my mother suggested to me that I work as a nursing auxiliary. And I spent a year working nights as a nursing auxiliary at the City Hospital. And there were two reasons for that, and I'll never forget this. And my mum is a really big role model for me. She said it's not just about whether you want to do nursing, but it's actually if nursing wants you to be a nurse. So it was really important for me to experience being on the ward, working nights. And actually after that, I got my love of people. And I think I'm naturally a people person, but I think in nursing it came out more. I spent a lot of time talking to people, and it made me realise that actually that's one of my skills, that I enjoy interacting with people. And in my current job, one of the things I will always say is that the patient is core to every single thing that I do. Every single day, when I'm looking at what I'm doing, if I can have an impact on what happens to our patients, then that's what drives me and that's what keeps me inspired to be a nurse, but also in my role as Associate Director of Nursing. That's something what I'll always strive to do. So it's a core value of mine. I've worked really hard, I would say. I came into nursing as a nursing auxiliary. I was fortunate to do my training in London, so I trained at St Bartholomew's, and that was quite an interesting time because I got two responses to that when I was offered the training place. From white colleagues and friends, it was, well, how did you get that? Because actually being a black nurse at St Bart's was very, very unusual in those days. But conversely, from my colleagues, my black colleagues, it was a sense of you're the recognisable or the acceptable face of black people. So they could understand why I got the post. So I got it from both ends actually. So that was something that I had to deal with. I did my nursing, I became a midwife, did my health visiting, and then spent some time doing lecturing and also being a locality manager down in London before I then came back to Nottingham. So I will say I've worked really hard. I enjoy what I do. I've always enjoyed what I do. And I would say to people, if you aspire to be a leader, don't let anything stop you. I always look for opportunities. And then one thing I'm quite astute at is finding those people who I think would be good as mentors. Because I think on your leadership journey, it can be a very lonely, isolated journey. So you need to find people who think like you and recognise in you something that will take you to the next step of your journey. I've been extremely fortunate because I've had a number of really good colleagues who've understood my aspirations and then mentored me to enable me to take the next step in my career. But I'd say you have to be tenacious, you have to be very clear on what you want to do. That's not about having a career pathway, because I don't think I ever had one, but it's about nothing's really going to stop me in my aspirations. And for me in the NHS, it's making sure that you're doing it for the right reason. So being very value driven. The day that I'm not doing anything that contributes to a patient's well-being or makes a significant contribution to the well-being of patients is the day probably that I shouldn't be nursing anymore. I see myself as a nurse. I'm not clinical anymore, but because I can drive the values and hopefully I inspire people and motivate people to be the best that they can be, that's where I make my impact on patients.